Pretty quickly after the first meeting with Cowther, we decided that we liked each other and that we were going to build a project. Next thing to think about was a story. I didn't really like opera as such growing up, because to me opera felt about as mannerist and artificial as any artistic form. But I've always liked the challenge of taking what music does so well, which is to build an imaginary world where you don't actually always know what the sounds, how they relate to a character or to an experience. You fill a lot of that in yourself. But if you add just a little bit of story and a little bit of something to look at, if you do it in the right way, I think the music just blossoms to another stage. Often when I've made operas, I've used novels as the text. If it's the right novel, the dialogue, in my view, is almost always there. And then the other thing that novels have is an enormous amount of kind of interior backstory and reflection about what's going on. The great thing about using a novel is you know that you're not going to turn that stuff into music. Well, some people do to their peril. I mean, you don't want a narrator saying, and then he went away and thought how bad things were. So you don't do that. All the kind of reflection about the action and the words is done in music. So I find it wonderful to translate all this texture of novels into musical form. In this project, because it started out with this idea of maybe a choreography of objects, I just had a sense from the beginning that we'd want to tell the story in a different way. Of course, we'd want action, but maybe just the suggestions of action. So I started thinking of poetry rather than novels and rather than prose. And one of my favorite poets is Robert Pinsky. He had talked to me a couple of years before that about writing some music for his translation into English of Dante's Inferno, and just called him out of the blue. I remember the first thing he said was, let's work on this, but I've got to tell you, my mastery is of words, not necessarily of telling stories. So how to make this into a story, we'll have to think about. To me, that sounded fine because I knew I wanted it to be an original story and not a very traditional story. We actually immediately kind of hit on the idea of the story being about a transformative moment in a young girl's life, and maybe in her relationship to her parents and also to the world of things and machines and what can have life to it and what can't, and how one gets attached to the things around you and how that can be very beautiful and also very poignant. So we thought, why don't we dig in and just write an aria before we have the whole story? So in fact, the group here in Monaco, they were having a kind of a big party and reception to present some of our ideas about this opera very early on, and people here were very, very excited. And then we went back and thought some more about the story, and pretty soon after that we decided that we really needed, in fact, somebody else in the project to help us tell the story. I had heard it through a colleague of ours in New York, somebody who specializes in producing unusual music theater works, named Diane Paulus. She told me about a couple, Diane Paulus and Randy Weiner. They work as a team. So Diane's a director, Randy is a dramaturge. He specializes in kind of making up stories, and they produce things together. It became obvious that Randy was a perfect person to sit down with Robert to start making a story. The four of us worked together on the ideas for the story. And Diane and I, since we're theater people, spent a lot of time, even before the story was there, thinking about the characters and the shape of this work and this whole idea of visual objects and physical world and the music. We worked on that for a couple of years. We finished the first draft of the libretto, if I'm not mistaken, probably in about 2005, something like that. Now we'd imagined this world where, oh boy, it's about this guy Simon Powers, and he builds this system so he can leave the world and live forever, and okay, now we have to build this system, and the system has to be a character, and so who designs that character? And so we realized that in many ways there was somebody missing on our creative team, somebody who could imagine a physical environment as a central part of storytelling and a powerful experience. And so I started thinking that that probably certainly wasn't going to be, no offense to opera directors or opera designers, but since traditional opera is so stage-bound and so, so artificial and old-fashioned in many ways. It's changing a little bit, but not changing so fast. I thought, it's probably not going to be somebody who does opera. And I started thinking, well, maybe film, maybe something where people create magic on film, and especially somebody who doesn't do everything in computer graphics, but maybe works with complex sets. So I asked around, and again, kind of like Kauthar Al-Aboud originally came to me, a bunch of people I asked said, oh, you should go talk to Alex McDowell. He had just finished designing Minority Report for Steven Spielberg, and actually had come to the Media Lab while designing Minority Report to kind of look a little bit at the future. Alex said, well, I've never done live theater, and actually don't know too much about opera, but yeah, this sounds really interesting, let's meet. And I basically told him, we had this basic story, the first draft of the libretto. I told him the ideas, and with napkins there, we started drawing. It's a system, it's not individual characters. This whole stage is somehow interconnected, and it's got to be surprising, and it's both monolithic, but it also is made up of independent parts. And so he became part of the project from that day on.